When a lot of people are asked how long they've spent on their phone, particularly the question, how long do they think they spend on their phone in a typical day? The answer is often far less than they're actually spending. And that's been established ever since people became fairly addicted to computer games, that we're shocked when we actually realize how much time we've spent. And when people hear statistics that we're spending 30, 40, 50 hours per week or more in some way digitally connected, that's a shock. And of course, there are statistics brought that when you multiply that over a year or your entire lifetime, there are literally months, if not years, that you're spending online. Now, for some people, that's not an issue, but for a lot of people, it is a shock and it's a worry. And it's a worry partly because they thought they were spending far less time. It's a worry because when they actually look at what value they've gained from doing that, in a lot of cases, though people have enjoyed their time, even see the digital technologies as a miracle, they are shocked at the actual amount of time they've spent. And time spent, notice that connection with like money spent, how much they've used up of a precious resource, which is the time they have in their life, to achieve whatever benefits that they've gained. And quite often, it's just time lost to people when they reflect. So that, of course, raises the what I often call the negative dialogue with digital, which is the idea that we should be switching off, that this stuff tempts us, it tempts us to addiction, that we get very little benefit from it overall, that it can be addictive, a bit like alcohol, that it harms us, it harms our health. And the negative dialogue is then all around how do we do it less? And then you can get into all kinds of documented phenomena like digital distraction, where we just seem to just get drawn into click, 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 and time flies by. And actually, we don't really remember most of our digital time. We can often have screen tiredness, and it hasn't moved us on in our lives, in our connections with family, in our careers. And the negative dialogue which is around is very, very well documented. There are various surveys and studies around it. But even to this day, ever since the digital realm first came into being, and you can argue whenever that is, maybe was it just after the war when the first computers really were being used, or was it in the 70s or the 80s or the birth of personal computing? But since that time, we've been spending more and more time online. And yet there is no absolute evidence. We haven't gone that deep with the data to be able to prove that the digital realm does more harm than good. And so, though there is a huge negative dialogue, there isn't actually firm scientific evidence that the digital realm harms us overall in the long run. And there may well be evidence that it, of course, gives us a lot of benefit too. One of the reasons we haven't collected that data, I would suggest, is because there isn't really as much funding for researching the impact of digital as there is in researching and developing new products that are then delivered through large companies who often are doing the research faster than universities and want us to buy them. Once again, all of that usually resolves into a negative digital dialogue. Our kids kind of blackmailing us and begging us and pushing us to buy the latest gaming devices, we needing the latest iPhones, the digital realm being at the top of the news headlines, sometimes way above some of the politics and famine in the world and the environmental stuff. It's actually the new iPhone that sometimes makes the headlines. And it leaves a lot of people frowning, a lot of people not knowing, but having a kind of a concern, a deep concern that whether the digital realm, whether our smartphones, our computers are positive or negative, that we don't quite have hold of them, that we're not really on top of our digital lives, that we're not really in mastery of them. There's certainly evidence that we don't use most of the features on our computers, our phones, that most people have little or no idea how to control them, how to stay private, how to manage the security, how to manage their time. And so we're sort of drifting or surfing or just kind of joining the crowd as the digital realm heads towards us plugging in, even physically, to these devices, implants in our brains. Again, there's a positive view of that and a negative one, a fear of it, and some people saying it's inevitable and it's going to, emancipate humanity. Now, all of that is in itself a distraction if what we are wanting to do in our lives is get to the end of them, looking back, having felt that there was a purpose, that it made a difference, that the world was better for our being there. If that is in you, if you feel that you'd like your life to matter, then given the amount of time you may be spending online, it certainly makes sense that anything you're doing in the physical realm to make that happen, which could be a purposeful job, that you're involved in your local community, that you are involved in charities, that just in the way that you are with your friends, that you've got certain values. It probably makes sense that if you want that to be the case, that you also have the ability and the skills to be able to set your purpose or to follow a purpose that you're conscious about, that you feel free about in terms of your commitment to it online. And the problem with the negative dialogue about it is that what we then try to do is find a way of being online, but largely through cutting things back, switching things off, being in a place of mistrust, being a place of cautiousness, of protecting our data. And negative states are often quite low energy, and they're quite often demotivating, and they're quite depressive and repressive things to do. But is the only alternative that the positive state that you might be in is one of kind of just giving into it, of following it, of surrendering to it, of just somehow hoping that these hours and hours and hours of digital time that can often feel quite good and euphoric as you get these likes and you give these likes out and connect with more and more people? Is that the only solution, that somehow you go in with your eyes kind of squinting, not quite focusing on what's there? It's all rather blurred, it's all rather unclear, but somehow you give yourself up to it. You press the submit button, which I've said many other times, of course, is what we often do when we're making commitments online. The submit button also means submit means surrender. So how do you gain control of that? And there are lots of ways of doing it, but one is to try and find the positive dialogue with it. And that involves practice. You might need to undo some behaviors. And I've spent a lot of time on how you can positively do that without switching off. It's often not about not doing this or doing this less. It's about doing that more and being aware of what your motives are and taking time to reflect after you've done things and taking time just to pause before your fingertips fly onto the keyboard or the Gorilla Glass, that you actually may just take a moment to be more mindful, more aware of what you're doing. If that's anything from reading out a text before you send it or reading out in your head, and then you usually edit it and send a better text or decide not to send it at all. The positive relationship is to slow down with the digital world, but that's not against being fast. Slowing down and finding the right pace, the right speed can be positive. Finding the right speed and the right pace to do things and knowing when to pause and stop will involve strengthening your willpower. And again, you don't tend to strengthen your willpower by stopping and cutting down. It's by practicing positive behaviors. And there are lots of books about how to engage with the digital world positively. And that can be everything from digital skills, from planning a little bit more ahead, from knowing how things work, going into those settings and becoming empowered so that you can make the decisions not about what you're not going to do, but what you are going to do more positively. Now, if you're up for that, where I think you have to be careful is that a lot of the online courses and skills, they've been offered a lot recently as the world's been in lockdown with coronavirus, but they were there before, are people offering you, I would say, pseudo positive stuff, 10 ways to do that. This, how to unleash that, how to gain power over that, how to get better at this. But ultimately, then when you get into those things, you'll quite often find that there's a lot of jargon, there's a lot of stuff you have to do quite fast. This is all about doing it in 24 hours. And that's that old, fast, busy world. What I would suggest is it's better sometimes to join a group, if it's online or face to face, to go at a slower pace and make sure that we learn. And as we learn, as learning theory says, you need to take time to stop and reflect on what's worked and what hasn't, so that you can incorporate those reflections into new learning. You reflect on your practice. That slowing down can feel healthier. And you can actually get more out of the digital world, not by doing less, but by doing what is actually needed to realize that purpose and value. And doing what's needed will involve you taking control, you deciding what you want to do, and using the digital world on your terms.